Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about human rights and government policy. Welcome back to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio. I am your host, Michael Clogs, and as we know that the COP26 has been going on in Glasgow, and one of the big topics of one of the days was coal, oil, and natural gas, and talking about burning clean energy, developing clean power so that we can have our homes energized and energize our society the way we do. And there are a lot of different alternatives to burning coal or fossil fuels, and our governments need to experiment with that and explore those things. And we need to, as citizens, we need to ensure that our government are doing the things that they can in order to limit the amount of carbon that is being pushed in the air, so that we can energize our homes and energize our society overall, so that we can share information, things like that. We do need the power. There are other alternatives to that. There are other alternatives in terms of not using nuclear power either. There are solar powers. There are other experimental power alternatives that can generate lots of power with very little fuel involved, and develop a high output so that our cities can run and we have all the comforts that we really desire to be in our homes. So let's listen to some of the promises that were made by different countries about the stop of burning of coal to power their cities. Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Well, friends, it's a pleasure to join you today to open the COP. And today is absolutely central to our efforts here at COP26. Because what we're trying to do here in Glasgow is to keep the Paris temperature goal within reach, to keep 1.5 alive. And that means that we have to decarbonise our power sectors. Because power, as you know, accounts for 1/4 of global emissions. And so when we took on the COP26 presidency, we were clear that we would make a big push on power. We wanted to push to end international coal financing. We wanted countries to phase out coal at home. We wanted to build up collaboration to support the move to clean power. And we wanted to ensure that the transition was just. We knew that if we achieved all of this, we would not just benefit the environment, but we would help create good green jobs, and we would help clean up the air. And today, I think we can say that the end of coal is in sight. The progress that we've seen over the past 2 years would have seemed like a lofty ambition when we took on the COP presidency back in 2019. Who would have thought back then that today we're able to say that we're choking off international coal financing? or that we would see a shift away from domestic coal power. At the G7 Climate Environment Ministerial meeting, which I co-chaired in May, every G7 nation committed to end international coal financing this year. South Korea and China have joined them. And at that meeting of the G7, the group committed to move to overwhelmingly decarbonised power systems in the 2030s. Others, such as Malaysia, Pakistan and Sri Lanka and Morocco, have committed to no new coal power. And so today, we are publishing the Global Coal to Clean Power Transition Statement, a commitment to end coal investment, to scale up clean power, to make a just transition, and phase out coal in the 2030s in major economies and in the 2040s elsewhere. It has 77 signatories, including 46 countries, such as Poland, Vietnam and Chile, 23 of which are making commitments on ending coal for the first time. And later on today, the Powering Past Coal Alliance will celebrate its new members, taking total membership to 165. And these include 7 new countries and 14 new private sector and financial institutions, including NatWest, Lloyds Bank, HSBC and Export Development Canada. Today, we also announced the Just Transition Declaration, signed by 14 governments and development banks, because we know that the health and prosperity of people and places must continue to be at the centre of the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. And you all know that renewables are booming too. Just a couple of days ago, here at COP26, we heard Prime Minister Modi commit to generating half of India's power from renewables by 2030. By then, China will have 1,200 gigawatts of renewables, and UK offshore wind will support at least 60,000 jobs. All this helps to power the world to net zero. And if I can just say that net zero commitments now cover 90% of global GDP, including countries like Russia, Thailand and Vietnam. Now that is up from less than 30% when we took on the COP presidency. And we are building up international collaboration to drive the clean power revolution. At the World Leaders Summit, we launched the Glasgow Breakthrough on Power. 33 governments have committed to collaborate to make clean power accessible and affordable and available to all by 2030. And last year we launched the COP26 Energy Transition Council to support the transition in developing countries. It is now already supporting 12 emerging economies, and the Council will continue for at least the next 5 years. And just 2 days ago, I helped to launch the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, a new $10 billion fund that will scale up to $100 billion by 2030. And it is partnering with the Energy Transition Council with the aim to get significant funds to support the transition in emerging economies. Now, all of this progress is really welcome and it's good, but we know that there is more to be done. And ultimately, it is up to all of us. It's up to governments, it's up to businesses, the finance institutions and civil society, and we must continue building the momentum through alliances and collaboration. So I say, friends, I do believe that the end of coal is in sight. I do believe we're getting to a point where we consign coal power to history. A brighter future comes ever closer, a future of cleaner air, cheaper power and good green jobs. But we must continue to work together over this vital decade to finish that job. The prize is to keep the Paris temperature goal within reach. Thank you.
COP President, thank you very much, COP President. Well, we now have a very special video to share with you. Ambitious
Dear colleagues and friends, there is no longer any doubt that climate change presents a critical and urgent threat to humanity. This is so because it will have devastating consequences for our economies, and societies if we do not take action now. Bold action must start with accelerated decarbonization of our energy systems. This involves harnessing new technologies to reduce our dependence on high-emission fossil fuels, including unabated coal power. It requires that we move to more sustainable and cost-effective energy sources. While the energy transition is necessary for reducing global carbon emissions, this transition must also be fair and just. For many developing economies, this requires massive investment in alternative energy sources and other infrastructure. It requires substantial support for workers and communities throughout the coal value chain who stand to lose their jobs as well as their livelihoods. A just transition requires finance and support from wealthier nations to enable low and medium income countries to protect employment and to promote development. In South Africa, we have committed to ambitious emission reduction targets. Achieving these targets will require the transformation of our energy system at an unprecedented speed and scale. This will include the decommissioning, the repowering, and the repurposing of coal-fired power stations and the rollout of renewable energy. But our ability to do so will be determined by the extent of support that we receive from developed economies. The political declaration that we announced this week with governments of France, Germany, the United Kingdom, and the United States, as well as the European Union, represents an important breakthrough in this effort. Through this partnership, an initial amount of $8.5 billion will be mobilized over the next 3 to 5 years to support South Africa's just transition to a low-carbon, climate-resilient future. This will enable us to implement our ambitious goals and to develop a model for a just transition that we hope can be used elsewhere. We are entering a brave new world bound together by our common destiny as humanity. We owe this to ourselves, to one another, and to the future generations. I thank you.
One thing that starts to give me confidence, or optimism anyway, it's that we are starting to create, for the countries that find it most difficult to transition away from fossil fuels, we're starting to create those coalitions of support to help them to move on. And so to help Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa in his vision, several countries, including the UK, are now working to supply $8.5 billion to help accelerate that transition away from coal, to help decarbonize the South African economy in a major way. And
today, as part of this commitment, the United States, together with the UK, France, Germany, and the EU, is announcing a new partnership with South Africa to help transform their economy to a clean energy economy more quickly. Right now, South Africa is the largest emitter in Africa, due in large part to the heavy reliance on coal for power. By closing South Africa's coal plants ahead of schedule and investing in clean power alternatives for the people of South Africa, and supporting an equitable, inclusive transition in South Africa's coal sector, we're following through on the pledge the G7 partners made in Cornwall to accelerate the transition away from coal in developing countries. And I realize the reliance on coal is consequential.
Cette solidarité est nécessaire car elle rend l'action possible partout où les solutions pour réduire les émissions existent. Un merveilleux exemple a été donné ces dernières semaines avec l'accompagnement que nous avons collectivement trouvé pour aider l'Afrique du Sud à réduire sa dépendance au charbon. C'est ce modèle d'accord qu'il nous faut ensuite bâtir sur la base de notre stratégie. Cet accord témoigne qu'on peut répondre aux défis d'une transition juste, équitable et ambitieuse.
Deutschland wird Teil einer Initiative sein, von der ich glaube, dass sie besonders interessant ist, nämlich einer Just Energy Transition Partnership mit Südafrika, wo wir zeigen, wie wir aus der Nutzung von Kohle aussteigen.
With President Cyril Ramaphosa supporting Africa in making the transition out of fossil fuel and into clean energy. I think this partnership, and I hope it, will be a blueprint for similar partnerships with other countries, and I look forward to our discussion.
Well, no fancy production work there.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to be here today representing the European Union at this historic moment. Since the last COP in Madrid, the European Union has made a political commitment and a legal commitment to become the first climate-neutral continent by 2050. The European Green Deal and the EU climate law set us on a green path for generations to come. As part of this journey, we are decarbonising our energy system. Most EU member states have already fixed their coal exit date or are working on it. Coal-producing regions from all parts of the European Union are already making the transition happen, closing mines and power plants and developing alternative sustainable activities to bring new jobs. We are supporting these efforts through our unprecedented post-COVID Green Recovery Programme and a dedicated Just Transition Programme. The latter will mobilise up to 75 billion euros to support the most affected regions, sectors and communities across the EU. Coal is the largest single source of emissions globally, and this has to stop. As an immediate step, external coal finance has to come to an end. The current situation on the energy markets is no reason to pause the coal exit. On the contrary, it shows the urgency to accelerate the rollout of clean energy solutions and dramatically reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. The European example shows it can be done. Today, 1/3 of our electricity already comes from renewables. In 2030, it will be 2/3, and the use of coal will be history in many parts of Europe. But for the transition to be a success, we must leave no one behind. This is why the EU made the just transition a key pillar of the European Green Deal, and why we strongly endorse the political declaration to support the conditions for a just transition internationally, as well as the global coal to clean power transition statement. You have just heard about our just energy transition partnership with South Africa. This is one way we are putting our commitments into practice. To learn about others, I invite you all to attend the events we are organising tomorrow at the EU Pavilion, together with the International Energy Agency, where we will present concrete measures we are taking to support a global just transition. I look forward to working with all of you to make the just transition a success. Thank you.
Commissioner Simpson, thank you very much indeed. And now if I could please call upon Minister Ben Ali from Morocco, if you could go to the other lectern, please. Thank you. COVID safe, COVID safe.
You're watching Sky News Climate Live. What we're showing you here is the headline event of Day 4, Energy Day at COP26. Some big announcements about the ending of the use of coal for energy, signed by 190 countries and a big deal to help South Africa with a big reliance on coal as a source of energy to help it phase that out. China notably absent from that announcement, but we are hearing more detail now on exactly what is being announced. It's 10 o'clock.
Our ambition with regard to our NDCs by reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by more than 45% by 2030 instead of the 42% that we had before, as part of our integrated strategy of low carbon development by 2050. Our commitment, I think I'm not going to reiterate our commitments for a low carbon energy transition that started actually more than a decade ago, based on three pillars: renewable energies, energy efficiency, and strengthening regional integration. And I'll come back to that later. And of course, we accompany that with a strong orientation for adapted innovation and some local content. It's a proactive political choice made by His Majesty the King Mohammed VI, and it has generated a dynamic among all political and economic actors as well as civil society. Today we have 50 renewable energy projects with an installed capacity of 4 gigawatts that are already in service, and we have more than 60 projects that are under development and under construction. But that is not enough. It's important to note these projects are made possible thanks to our existing institutional regulatory framework that we are working 24/7 to streamline that regulatory framework and improve the guidelines, improve the business climate, and facilitate investments from the national investments and international investments as well. We have made progress in the impact of just an energy transition on social economic plans. We already have 2 platforms in terms of R&D, innovation and industrialization that are already in operation, dedicated to green technologies, green buildings and smart grids. And we have other developments, including of course in hydrogen, in energy recovery from biomass, and the water energy agriculture nexus. We are also witnessing an emergence of a local industrial ecosystem that we are pushing forward, and the rise of renewable energies and decentralized production is enabling us to really use these developments for the specific needs of many social economic needs. But here again, it is not enough. We are reviewing our energy strategy to provide a greener energy mix by 2030. Based on, again, energy efficiency, but we are focusing particularly on the industrial and tertiary sectors and the promotion of sustainable mobility, in addition to energy saving potential of more than 20% by 2030. How to accelerate that inclusive and just energy transition? I think it's necessary to have control over the impact to minimize the technological and financial risks and to maximize the social economic benefits, especially at the local and regional level. I will finish by saying that if we don't want new coal, as far as Morocco is concerned, there is no energy transition without a stronger international and regional cooperation to promote green technologies, of course, hydrogen applications, but to really increase connectivity between our neighbors and our trade partners. I would like to finish by reiterating my thanks, and we support the different initiatives that were announced at this COP, with COP26, which are aligned with our strategic vision and development model. Thank you very much.
Minister Ben-Ali, thank you very much indeed. And now if I could call on Sri Lanka and Minister Dissanayake, please, from this lectern. Thank you.
Good morning, ministers, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you today. I present the beautiful island Sri Lanka, where nature and the planet are singularly addressed as the mother, a beautiful mother. She has given so much, a lot of sun, a lot of rain, and the unimaginable scale of biodiversity, both in fauna and flora. We have taken good care of her, trading so much very lightly, contributing just 1th of 2000 to the emission burn of the planet from human activities. We reaffirm that fragility will remain as our way of life in the future too. However, we have taken some great initiatives to reduce even this small contribution from Sri Lanka to the emission burden of the planet. Considering energy sector as a notable contribution to the emissions, we have taken all possible measures to accelerate the energy transition. We anticipate to generate 70% of our electricity from renewable energy resources by 2030, doubling our 36% share of the renewables in power generation today. This requires an addition of 9,000 megawatts of clean renewable energy capacity, leading to an annual electricity generation of 21,000 gigawatt hours, translating to an investment of $10 billion US. It will contribute to an annual CO2 emission reduction of 14 million tons by way of avoiding petroleum fuel-based electricity generation. Our effort does not end here, and it encompasses demand-side management too. We also anticipate the National Energy Efficiency Improvement and Conservation Program to reduce the energy demand, so that our clean energy targets will be realized quicker and the gain realized will be sustained. With these efforts, we are trading towards carbon neutrality in the energy sector by 2050. We anticipate a further addition of 6,000 megawatt from renewable energy sources to cater to the fossil fuel demand dislodged by transport electrification, which will again be supported by transport energy demand reduction measures. We have proposed our ambitious target in the nationality demand determined contributions, where we invite the spirited cooperation of developed economies to realize the 20% supported NDCs. It is our sincere hope that developed economies and the green funds will reduce the transaction burden of these fund flows and technology transfer, making it easier for the developing world to access those. We earnestly request you to develop simpler tools and hassle-free conduits to allow funds and technology to reach the developing world with the amount of least delay, so urgent actions can be taken to reduce the present and future emissions burdens from the developing economies. Thank you for all present here today. Thank you.
Minister Dissanayake, thank you very much indeed. And if I can now call on Grenada and Minister Steele, thank you.
Colleagues, friends, a very warm good morning. As a small island developing state in the Caribbean, which neither produces nor consumes coal, you may ask, who am I to add my voice to this conversation? The answer is a simple one. The single most impactful intervention we can implement today to significantly bend the curve to a 1.5 pathway. This is why we must consign coal to history. We commend those who have already taken important steps, countries that have committed to coal phase-out dates and announcements to end I have some technology challenges here. We commend those who have already taken important steps, countries that have committed to coal phase-out dates and announcements to end in phase financing of coal projects abroad. But we still have a long way to go. The longer this takes, the less likely we are to achieving our goal to limiting warming to 1.5. We know what needs to be done. For richer countries, no more coal power from 2030, and all coal-fired power stations shut by 2040 at the latest. But the question then is, how do we achieve a just and inclusive transition when globally we still have close to 1 billion people without access to electricity? Here is where some of the difficult questions need to be answered. There are those that say we should transition to gas and that gas is a bridging fuel. Let's be honest, this is a bridge to nowhere. Gas needs to peak now and begin a rapid decline. We have much cheaper and cleaner alternatives in the form of renewable energy and storage, and green hydrogen is coming. Fossil fuel subsidies are propping up coal and gas. What a wasted opportunity when you consider the renewables that could be rolling out with that money and the jobs that come with it. Speaking as a small voice from a small island, even more creative solutions are needed than those currently on the table. What is required is unprecedented levels of cooperation and genuine resolve between those in the G20, individually and collectively. As a group that generates 75% of global emissions and constitutes 80% of global GDP, between them, this issue can be resolved. If they don't, then who will? And this is why we're all here, as individual nations, with all our domestic challenges and complexities. But we're also here as a global community with the power, the wealth, and the mandate to do what is needed collectively. The future of countries like mine depend on whether or not coal seams around the world are left as they are. And this is why Grenada lends its support to the Clean Energy Transition Initiative and commends today's launch of the Just Transition Declaration. For my island, it is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to leapfrog the energy systems of our grandparents to create a new energy system that is fit for our children. I thank you.
Minister Steele, thank you very much indeed. And now to hear from another island nation, Minister Shauna from the Maldives. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to congratulate the COP presidency and the Secretariat for the impossible work that you have done in making us come here and be in attendance in person. Thank you to the UK for their leadership in getting us all here safely. We came to COP because this is our lifeline. Excellencies, the Maldives' climate and energy challenges are enormous. The Maldives depends almost entirely on imported fossil fuels in meeting our energy needs. The imported diesel costs us a fortune, leaving us at the mercy of volatile global energy markets. Our islands are scattered across the sea, making economies of scale impossible. Considering this, and despite the fact that Maldives' fossil fuel emissions are relatively negligible, it is perhaps no surprise that the government's policy is to quit fossil fuels as quickly as possible and replace them with something the Maldives has in abundance: sunshine. Today, 12% of our energy is coming from renewables. As a country on the front line of the climate crisis, a transition to renewables is not just about mitigation, but also about adaptation and building resilience. To achieve this transformation from an economy run on diesel to one powered by the sun will require substantial amounts of foreign capital and investments. It also needs reliable data and innovative technology. We are working to install floating solar in our lagoons. The science is so clear, the technology is available, the prices are declining. We just need access to these. World leaders, negotiators, funding agencies, all of us are here today. But the planet does not have room for any more negotiations. We just have to decarbonize. We have to keep it under 1.5. The difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees for countries like the Maldives is a death sentence. We have to give away those hard positions we have been holding on to for the past decades. I don't like to think of the Maldives and small islands as victims alone. We can also be victors. We have been part of the energy transition. We're coming out of a pandemic. We found the vaccines. Treat climate emergency like an emergency. And I am confident that we can all do this together. But even if we go net zero just this year, it won't save us. Because this is not a unilateral issue. We need the entire world to get behind the science and transition to a world fueled by renewables. Thank you.
Minister Shawna, thank you very much indeed. Ministers, Commissioner, thank you very much for your words. Fantastic to hear those clean transition commitments. So can I ask you please to leave the stage. You can join your seats in the plenary, on the plenary floor. Thank you very much indeed. Now, I am delighted to introduce our next speaker, the Special Representative of the UN Secretary General and the CEO of Sustainable Energy for All, Damilola Ogunbayi. Damilola, please, over to you.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to be here with you all today. On behalf of the UN Secretary General, I'd like to thank the COP President Alok Sharma and his team for their efforts for prioritizing energy here at COP26, including through the Energy Transition Council and the great work the team there have been doing. Energy accounts for over 2/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. But at the same time, 759 million people in this world still lack access to basic electricity. And over 2.6 billion don't even have access to clean cooking solutions. Over the next 9 years, we have to do two things at once. First, we must cut emissions drastically. The emissions gap report just released by the UN Environment told us the new and updated NDCs only take 7.5% of predicted 2030 emissions, while 55% is needed to achieve the Paris Agreement. Second, we must deliver on the promise we made in the Sustainable Development Goal 7 to provide affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy to all by 2030. If we are to do this by 2030, we need to radically rethink how we deliver energy services. We must answer the call of the UN Secretary General and COP President to co-sign coal into history, starting with the OECD countries by 2030 and globally by 2040. After 2021, no new coal plants should be in the pipeline, which is also reflected in the great work that has been seen from the Global Call to Clean Power Transition Statement. If this year is the year we put an end to coal, this must also be the year that we prove to developing countries that clean energy is the most attractive and most affordable option by providing them a clean energy offer. And we must do this through technical assistance, collaboration, and making finance for clean energy dramatically easier to access. We must show why clean energy is an important part of the blueprint for a sustainable future and move beyond thinking that providing clean energy for basic household is enough. It must be energy for businesses, economic growth, and industrial development. Consider the alternative. Right now, we are on track for a 2.7-degree temperature rise, and by 2030, we will still leave over 600 million people without electricity and over 2.3 billion people without clean cooking. This is not compatible with the commitments we made at Paris, or is it compatible with the promise we made in 2015 to achieve Sustainable Development Goals by 2030? We are running out of time, so we have no choice but to be decisive and recommit to the collaboration and financing necessary to make just, equitable, and inclusive energy transitions possible for those who have contributed the least to climate change. Together, we are the architects of a sustainable future for all. And on behalf of the Secretary General, I want to thank all of you gathered here for all the great work you have done and committing to all the work ahead. Thank you.
Damilona, thank you very much indeed. We now turn to the second part of our event, which is a panel discussion between ministers from countries that are actively pursuing a just and inclusive energy transition and international experts from the International Labour Organization and International Trade Union Congress. To chair this panel, I am delighted to introduce Vic van Vuren, Director for Enterprise at the International Labour Organization. Vic.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. It was very exciting for me as a South African to hear the opening remarks and the deal that's just been done with President Cyril Ramaphosa. I look forward to going home and seeing the progress. But Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome the panelists on stage, and I'll introduce them now, and then we will go one by one after I've made a few opening remarks. On my right, the Secretary of State, Mr. Kwasi Kwarteng from the United Kingdom. On his right, Secretary Jennifer Granholm from the United States. And on my left, Ms. Sharon Burrow, the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation. We also have two video inserts that we will hear from Vice President Teresa Ribera of Spain and also Minister Svenja Schulz from Germany. The panel is set to discuss the Just Transition Declaration that the UK COP26 presidency has spearheaded under the Energy Transition Council. The ILO has been privileged to contribute to the work of the Council. A just energy transition is urgent, indispensable and possible. It's about maximizing economic and social gains while effectively managing the risks of the economic, technological and social transformation. The good news is that we have a positive narrative. There is clear evidence of more gains for the economy and people than losses.
Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hello everyone. This is an important time and it requires important measures. That's why Canada's and Canadians have been stepping up here at COP26. It's a milestone. Since when we met in Paris, we're facing big challenges as communities, as countries, and as a world. And it's time for some big solutions. We laid out plans to get to net zero by 2050 at home. We've made progress with partners to keep 1.5 alive as a goal we need to reach. Chez nous, on a mis un prix sur la pollution qu'on a défendu devant la Cour suprême et même créé un consensus parmi les Canadiens. Il faut avancer sur la tarification du carbone. On a amené des investissements records dans le transport collectif, dans les énergies propres. On a fait énormément en partenariat avec les peuples autochtones et les partenaires à travers le pays comme les provinces pour protéger nos océans, pour protéger nos terres et notre biodiversité. We're going to keep moving forward at home. On emissions, we've committed to put a cap and begin to cut emissions from oil and gas production. We're the first major oil and gas producing nation to do that. We committed to reduce methane emissions by at least 30% by 2030, and in particular, reduce oil and gas methane emissions by 75% by 2030. On electricity, we've committed to phasing out coal-fired electricity by 2030. We're going to ensure that all new vehicle sales are zero-emission vehicles and that we have a net zero grid by 2035. This is something we've said a number of times, and people have remarked upon here at COP, that we're not just saying we need to move forward as a world, we ought to do things. Canada is showing that we are doing things. We're making big decisions at home and encouraging people around the world to do more as well. Because climate change doesn't recognize borders. At COP, I've spoken to dozens and dozens of leaders driving ambition, deepening cooperation. Today, with partners like the IMF, World Bank, and the World Trade Organization, we're calling to bringing in carbon pricing to triple it on emissions, up from about 21% of emissions covered by a price on pollution around the world to get to 60% covered by a price on pollution by 2030. We're working with Germany and other partners on reaching that $100 billion a year commitment that was made at Paris that is as yet unfulfilled. We're getting close. There's still more work to do that Stephen and others are going to keep pushing on over the coming days. Notre planète est à un moment critique. Les progrès des derniers jours qu'on a vus au G20, qu'on a vus ici à COP avec des engagements par différents chefs de gouvernement, c'est un bon début, mais ce n'est qu'un début. Les gens à travers la planète nous regardent, les travailleurs, les peuples autochtones, les jeunes sont en train d'exiger encore plus de leadership. Les dirigeants de la planète, des pays d'un bout à l'autre de ce monde. Et c'est exactement ce sur quoi le Canada se concentre. Notre avenir et celui de nos enfants est en jeu. We've been past 5 days extremely busy for our Canadian delegation. From our first stop in the Netherlands, where we talked about trade and shared values and the work we need to continue to do with strong allies on multilateralism and promoting democracy, to the G20 in Italy, where we brought the world together to recognize 1.5 as a target, to commit to reaching net zero by the middle of the century. These are things that we're going to have to continue to push on. It involved working on vaccines and global supply chains and economic growth and strengthening our support for people who are struggling with affordability at the same time as we show leadership on the big issues that the world is facing. So from climate action to vaccines to progressive trade, we focused on what matters to Canadians: clean air and good jobs, beating COVID-19, and doing our part to build a stronger, healthier world. It's been a busy number of days, but Canada has been there to do the hard work and to continue doing the hard work over the coming days to build a better future, not just for Canadians, but for everyone. C'est le travail que nous devons faire, c'est le travail que nous allons faire. Merci.
Madame la ministre, on va commencer la période de questions pour 20 minutes. Une question, un suivi. One question, one follow-up. starting with David Cochran from CBC News.
Hi there, Prime Minister. I wanted to touch on your session this morning on pushing for a global minimum price on carbon. You had like-minded allies there from Europe, multilateral organizations who are clearly supportive of this, but missing biggest traded partner, biggest economy, the United States. A national carbon pricing plan is not part of what Joe Biden is proposing. So how big of an obstacle is that to achieving this goal?
I think we all recognize that the biggest obstacle is figuring out how we're all going to live up to our commitments to arrive at net zero emissions by 2050. How we're going to meet our 2030 targets. And we know there are many different approaches that every country is going to have to take to reduce emissions, to decarbonize their economy, to get to net zero. And carbon pricing is one of the most effective and cheapest ways to get there. Economists know that it's one of the most efficient ways of doing it, and it's an extremely powerful tool that incentivizes businesses and consumers to make smarter choices. Making sure that pollution isn't free anywhere is a very smart and powerful idea. Now, countries are beginning to see that what we've done in Canada and what has been done elsewhere is extremely powerful for reducing emissions. And we're excited about the interest that international organizations and other countries are looking at what we've done with. So there's lots of work to do, but the important thing is reducing those emissions. And I am very optimistic that as people look at the hard work of reducing emissions, they'll realize that not putting a price on pollution in their jurisdictions is going to mean having to do more expensively, in more complex ways in other parts of their economy. And that's what's so appealing about carbon pricing. Tout à fait. Je pense que le grand défi auquel on fait face, c'est de réduire les émissions jusqu'à la carboneutralité en 2050. Et évidemment, il y a différents moyens, différents outils qu'on peut utiliser. Mais on sait aussi qu'un des outils les plus puissants pour le faire, le plus efficace pour le faire, c'est de mettre un prix sur la pollution, de s'assurer que de polluer n'est plus gratuit nulle part. Alors, les différents pays vont prendre leurs propres décisions sur comment ils vont et quels outils ils vont utiliser, mais nous, on est là pour démontrer que ça se fait de façon directe, qui aide les gens et qui va fonctionner pour limiter les émissions. Et je sais qu'il y a bien des pays qui vont être très intéressés par l'exemple, le leadership du Canada et d'autres pays qui sont déjà allés de l'avant avec la tarification du carbone.
Prime Minister, between the G20 and here, we've seen some of the other big economies, China, Russia, India, either holding out or not showing up on a lot of the initiatives you're trying to make progress on. The Americans are here, they're engaged. I mean, do you think you can convince America to move towards a full carbon pricing regime in all 50 states?
What I'm pointing out, David, is that we have an extremely powerful tool that is straightforward, that everyone can understand. We put a price on pollution to make sure that polluting isn't free, and consumers and businesses have the predictability to be able to make choices and investments that will reduce our emissions. There are lots of different tools that can be used, and every country will pick their options. But what we can do is show that it's powerful, it's straightforward, and it's impactful. To do that, and that's what we're going to continue to do. Look, a few years ago, nobody would have even imagined that we could set a global minimum corporate tax. And suddenly we have. These are things that are the right ideas that when their time has come, people start to adopt, and that's what we're going to be pushing very hard around the world on.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau, Madeleine Blais-Morin, Radio-Canada. Vous avez vanté ce matin le modèle, justement, de la taxe sur le carbone, de redonner de l'argent dans le portefeuille des Canadiens, mais ce n'est pas un modèle qui est en vigueur partout au pays. Donc, à mesure que le prix va augmenter, vous parlez de 170 $ la tonne en 2030, est-ce que ça va devenir plus difficile de ne pas avoir un modèle uniforme au pays?
Je pense que ce qui compte le plus, c'est l'impact. On sait très bien qu'il y a différentes façons de mettre un prix sur la pollution. Il y a des bourses de carbone, il y a la tarification directe. L'important, c'est de s'assurer que ce n'est plus gratuit de polluer et de s'assurer que c'est un système équivalent. Les différents systèmes sont équivalents les uns aux autres à travers le pays et éventuellement à travers le monde. On sait très bien que tous les pays ne vont pas avoir exactement la même approche. On n'a pas tous les mêmes économies, les mêmes défis. Mais si on peut se mettre d'accord sur des standards, sur un impact semblable, comme on a pu faire au Canada, où différentes provinces ont des différentes façons de faire, mais on peut s'assurer que l'équivalence est là. Et nous allons continuer de travailler pour s'assurer que l'impact de ce prix sur la pollution est pareil à travers le pays.
Après les 48 heures que vous avez passées, puis après le sommet du G20, quel est votre niveau de confiance que le 1,5 degré, c'est encore possible de le respecter, cet objectif-là?
Je sais que c'est encore possible. Mais je sais aussi que ça va exiger pas juste tout le travail qu'on est en train de faire, mais ça va exiger encore plus de travail. C'est pour ça que nous, comme pays, mais d'autres aussi, sont en train de se pousser les uns les autres pour en faire plus. La COP26, c'est un moment extrêmement important, mais c'est un moment, un milestone parmi tant d'autres. Nous allons devoir être ambitieux ici, et l'année prochaine, nous allons continuer d'avoir besoin d'être ambitieux et de continuer à en faire plus pour atteindre ce 1,5 qui est si nécessaire.
In English?
I think one of the things we recognize is that we're going to need to be continuing to push our levels of ambition. What we're doing by pushing hard now and pushing on the development of new solutions, of technologies, of new ways of growing our economy, of decarbonizing, is going to allow us to continue to be even more ambitious. What we decide right here is going to be important, but as we continue to push and be even more ambitious, as we support people with good jobs in our communities and around the world, as we support the developing world with the need to reduce emissions and provide energy for their citizens in ways that don't contribute to accelerated greenhouse climate change. These are the things we need to do. So yes, I am confident we're going to be able to stay on that track for 1.5 because I am confident we are going to continue to keep pushing ourselves and each other to be more and more ambitious.
Mia Rabson from the Canadian Press. The President of the European Commission talked about border carbon adjustments that they're planning to do. Just curious in terms of preventing carbon leakage or sort of pushing for this global carbon price that you're talking about, what role could those play in Canada, and are you seriously considering it?
We know, for example, that Canada produces some of the cleanest aluminum in the world. What we're doing right now in different parts of the country, and what we're innovating with ELYSIS, which is a not just energy but inputs and processes for net zero aluminum, is something that is extraordinarily valuable to discerning consumers around the world. But we are right now competing with aluminum around the world that can be sold at even cheaper prices because it is done in dirtier ways with significantly lower labor standards. I don't think that's the kind of world we want, where people who do the right things the right way get penalized, and people who do the wrong things the wrong ways get advantages. So all we're looking at, and what the conversations are all about right now, whether it's a global minimum standard for a price on pollution or border adjustments or what have you, is a way of making sure a level playing field, and that those who are stepping up and doing everything they can to reduce their emissions, to demonstrate new technologies that will be effective, are not penalized before they can even begin. On sait par exemple que l'aluminium fait au Canada, au Québec, et l'aluminium le plus propre au monde. Et une fois qu'on a la technologie Hélicis, dans laquelle on est en train d'investir, ça va être encore plus. Mais sur le marché mondial, cet aluminium canadien est en train de compétitionner avec de l'aluminium fait ailleurs, avec des processus plus nocifs pour l'environnement, avec des standards de travail plus bas. Et donc, nous sommes à un désavantage parce qu'on est en train de faire de meilleures choses pour l'environnement, pour les citoyens. Je pense que tout le monde peut comprendre qu'on a besoin d'avoir un système qui reconnaît et valorise le travail que font les pays, les compagnies, qui sont en train de faire les bonnes choses pour les bonnes raisons, et non les décourager en permettant à ceux qui ne sont pas en train de montrer du leadership en matière d'environnement de prendre des avantages. Donc, c'est ça, ces conversations que nous sommes en train d'avoir, et il y a plusieurs mécanismes, que ce soit un standard minimum pour une tarification du carbone, que ce soit des ajustements à la frontière. Il y a toutes sortes de façons de le faire, et ces conversations continuent. Mais le principe, je pense qu'on peut s'entendre que ceux qui font les bonnes choses de la bonne façon devraient être reconnus et valorisés pour ce qu'ils sont en train de faire.
Is there more your government should be doing to make the U.S. aware of the role Canada's critical minerals could play in fixing some of the supply chain problems? Did you raise that with President Biden over the last few days? And did you also raise the issue of their proposed tax credit on electric vehicles and the impact it'll have on Canada?
Over the past number of days, I've had many interactions with President Biden. One of them, the supply chain event at the G20 in Rome, was specifically focused on things like the two issues you brought up. On critical minerals, for example, Canada and Australia, who is sitting beside me, have access to a large numbers of the critical minerals that are needed in the production of batteries and the production of modern technologies. But again, the challenge is the extraction and the processing of those in our countries is more costly because we have higher environmental standards, higher labor standards than the countries that are right now busy cornering the market on those sorts of productions. So the conversation we had is about, well, how much is it of value to developed countries to have a secure, friendly source of those critical minerals that are done in better and more responsible ways, even though obviously they may be a little more expensive. And having those conversations about, it's worth it, particularly as we come through COVID, to make sure we have strong supply chains, supply lines that are reliable and not subject to coercive practices or manipulation. These are the conversations we're having. And on the auto sector, the fact that Canada is as committed as we are to producing zero-emission vehicles, that we're already seeing changes in our auto industry, that our auto industry is so tremendously interwoven with that of the United States and has been for 50 years, means that I know we're going to be able to work together to develop electric cars and to make sure that Canada, as the number one export destination for cars made in the United States, continues to be able to work hand in hand in our auto sector with the United States, including on electric vehicles.
Mr. Mike Couture with Global National. There's a high cost to coming to summits like this one, considering all of the emissions, the carbon footprint, and the risk of COVID-19 for not only you, but your entire delegation. So I was wondering, was it worth the lack of results that you're leaving with today on climate action?
Mike, I totally disagree with the premise of your question. What we've actually seen today, whether it's the commitment to reduce our oil and gas methane emissions by 70% by 2030, whether it's the work that we've been doing with Germany to push the world towards that $1 billion in $100 billion in climate financing that the world so desperately needs, whether it's being able to, as you saw this morning, promote carbon pricing as a powerful, effective, and politically saleable way to reduce emissions in the most efficient way. In the dozens and dozens of conversations I've had with world leaders on everything from better infrastructure for Smile Island developing states like the Caribbean that are faced with increasing storms but need to build climate resilient infrastructure and decrease their emissions, whether it's conversations about the climate crisis in sub-Saharan Africa with some of our African partners, whether it's working hand in glove with Asian partners on investments in infrastructure, in protecting our oceans. This is the world coming together to pay heed to the greatest crisis that our citizens are calling us to do more on, and quite frankly, our citizens and future generations will suffer from if we don't act decisively. So yes, it is a good thing that the world be coming together here this week in Glasgow.
To follow up, I just want to ask you, the Liberal platform had promised to end coal exports from and through Canada by 2030. Your news release yesterday dropped the reference to exports through Canada. So are you going to end exports of U.S. coal through Canada by 2030?
We've committed to end thermal coal exports by 2030. The details are being worked out by our Environment Minister, by our Natural Resources Minister, but we made very strong commitments in our campaign, commitments that we've delivered on just a few months later today, whether it's the 75% on oil and gas methane reductions, whether it's capping and cutting emissions in the oil and gas sector, which we are the first major oil and gas producing country to do that, or whether it's leading the world on carbon pricing. These are things that we laid out to Canadians we would do. Just a few months later, we're doing them.
Hi, Prime Minister. JP Tasker from CBC News. Your new Environment Minister is an outspoken critic of nuclear energy. He has called for nuclear power plants in this country to be shut down. Do you still see a role for nuclear energy as we start to transition to cleaner energy in Canada? Is there still, should we still rely on nuclear power to get us through it?
I think we're going to need every different alternative to be pursued and explored fully as we try to get off fossil fuels as a world in time to prevent more than 1.5 degrees in global temperatures. And that means investing more in wind, investing more in solar, and yes, exploring nuclear. We have a number of provinces that are working hard on small modular reactors, and I'm not going to prejudge the outcome of what will be the right energy mix for us in the coming decades, and I'm certain it's going to continue to evolve. So I'm not taking anything off the table. Canada has a strong history in nuclear energy. And we will continue to look at all ways to make sure we're preventing this planet from hitting the catastrophic climate change level.
Just on a totally separate topic, as you know, the Canadian flag has been at half-mast on federal buildings now for 7 months. Remembrance Day is next week. What's your plan? When will you start to raise those flags on federal buildings?
We continue to work very closely with partners, with Indigenous peoples, with communities across the country. There is an understanding of how important it is to be able to lower the flags on Remembrance Day to mark our veterans, to mark people including Indigenous peoples who've stepped up to fight for Canadian values and paid the ultimate sacrifice. And I am confident that the conversations with Indigenous leadership on making sure we are able to lower the flags once again on November 11th will come at the right solution. Okay. Je sais que c'est important pour tous les Canadiens, incluant les peuples autochtones, de pouvoir se souvenir et honorer ceux qui ont fait le sacrifice ultime en servant leur pays, en se battant pour nos valeurs, pour nos principes en tant que pays. Donc je sais que le 11 novembre, nous allons pouvoir baisser le drapeau canadien à travers le pays. Comment on va y arriver? On est en train justement de parler de façon très proche avec les peuples autochtones pour s'assurer que ce soit fait de la bonne façon.
Hello, Heather Schofield from the Toronto Star. As you said off the top, you've signed on to quite a few commitments here. And, you know, deforestation, it looks like it will touch to the heart of, you know, British Columbia's economy, New Brunswick, Quebec. Your zero emissions vehicles touches the auto industry in Ontario. The oil and gas cap and the methane reductions obviously touch the oil sands very, very closely. Are we ready for this?
I think Canadians know that the world is changing. Our economy is changing. And quite frankly, climate change is a reality that is going to transform our lives, whether we reach 1.5 degree or not. Canadians also know that even as we face changes and transformations in the way we live, work, and play, there is also a tremendous opportunity to lead, to be successful, to create solutions that are beneficial to Canadians and indeed to the entire world. Canadians know how to step up. We know how to work hard. We know how to innovate. We know how to create solutions. From energy workers in Alberta to scientists in Quebec and Ontario to loggers right across the country. In every corner of the country, there are people working hard to build a better future for themselves, for their kids, for their community, for their country. And right now, we're seeing the country come together to say, this is our moment. This is the moment where, as Canadians, and indeed as a world, we need to make that transformation happen. And it's so much better to be leading it than to be dragged along behind.
So, given all those commitments, is it time then to increase your ambition and go above the 40 to 45% by 2030?
Every step of the way, we haven't just placed ambitious targets forward. We've demonstrated a concrete plan to achieve those targets. By bringing in a price on pollution early on in our mandate, we were able to be confident that we were going to surpass the 30% reduction target that we inherited from the previous government. And as we saw our capacity to go even beyond it, we set a new target of 36% that we knew we'd be able to achieve. And now, as it is very clear we're going to be able to achieve that 36% and beyond, we've set another target of 40 to 45%. And we're going to continue to look to increase our ambition. But every step of the way, we're not going to do what so many governments in Canada's past and indeed around the world have continued to do, which is set targets without a concrete plan to meet them. I look forward to presenting even more ambitious targets in the future, but we will ensure that before we set new targets, we are able to achieve the ambitious targets that we've just set out here at COP.
Glenn McGregor, CTV News. In your response to my colleague Mike, you listed all the things that you think were accomplished over the past 2 days. I can't believe you think this was a complete success. What things that you were hoping to see here in Glasgow didn't happen, and can you explain maybe why they didn't happen?
Well, first of all, Glenn, this is day 2 of a 2-week conference of the parties. The work that is going to be done over the coming 2 weeks by extraordinary Canadian delegations, by our Environment Minister and by the many other ministers who are coming to lend a hand, is going to be difficult, but is going to be incredibly important. And what we were able, I think, as Canadians and as partners to many countries around the world, to set as a level of ambition, as a level of urgency, to dive into those negotiations that will finally come out of COP26, I think is off to a great start. But you're right to be cynical, Glenn, because we've seen hard things not get done in the past, but that's no reason to not continue to believe that we can push harder and bring more people along and rise to the moment that, quite frankly, citizens around the world are expecting of us collectively.
You say you are hopeful of raising the targets, and you also say that carbon pricing, in your view, is the most efficient way of hitting those targets. Is there a linkage there? Could you see a point where Canada's carbon pricing increases above and beyond the current rate that it's rising at? Sweden's at, I think, 130 US, far ahead of us, where we will be for many years. Do you see in the next, in the short term, medium term, long term, increasing the speed with which, or the rate at which you're pricing carbon?
One of the key elements of carbon pricing and what makes it so successful as a measure to drive down emissions is the predictability. Is that companies that are looking at investments that will, be impacting the way they do business over the next decade, over the next 2 decades, want to know what the best way to invest in now. So the fact that we've set a very ambitious track for our carbon price that rises by $15 a year, all the way up to $170 a year, $170 a ton by 2030, is exactly the kind of strong, clear price signal that investors in Canada and businesses in Canada will know that it's worthwhile to keep emissions down, it's worthwhile to innovate, and for people around the world, it's worthwhile to invest in Canada because we are serious about tackling climate change. We've laid out the trajectory until 2030. Of course, as we approach 2030, I'm sure there will be more conversations by future governments about what that trajectory needs to be and looks like in the coming decades. But we won't be the only ones in the world having that conversation by then, because we're very optimistic we're going to be able to get to tripling the amount of emissions covered by carbon pricing in the coming years.
We'll take one last question.
It's John Woodside, Canada's National Observer. I want to follow up on this deforestation pledge. This summer really showed the threat posed to Canadian forests by wildfires, and with a certain amount of warming locked in, these are only going to get worse. We also know that wildfires are made worse by monocropping and glyphosate spraying. So what, if anything, will Canada do to make sure the quality of forests are protected, not just the quantity of trees?
Excellent questions. Canada is home to one of the largest continuous forests in the world, and we have a responsibility to protect it. We've seen the impact of global temperatures rising, that are rising twice as fast in Canada as elsewhere in the world, on those forests, and we have a responsibility to be stewards of them. I'm happy to turn it over to Minister Guilbeault, who was there at the forests announcement today while I was at an oceans announcement, to talk about how we're going to make that a reality. Stephen?
Merci, Monsieur le Premier Ministre. Thank you. I think, the approach is really changing in the way we look at forestry and linking it to obviously the climate crisis, but also biodiversity. So I think these things go hand in hand, and I think this is the new approach that we're seeing on the global scale, and certainly an approach in Canada that we're moving towards in partnership with Indigenous peoples, and certainly the very ambitious targets that Canada has set in terms of protecting our landmass and our oceans as well. We're amongst the leaders in the world that have made that commitment for 25 by 25 and 30 by 30. But obviously, it has to be done right from a biodiversity perspective.
Okay. And just as a follow-up, I just want to switch gears just a little bit with Trans Mountain, with both of you here. So Trans Mountain, it's not even halfway built. It's far over budget. The energy regulator forecasts show the demand isn't there. It's being built to move a harmful product. And the International Energy Agency is practically screaming there can be no more fossil fuel projects in a 1.5 degree world. So I'd like to know, why should other countries here take Canada seriously when it claims climate leadership when it won't take decisive action on something this night and day?
First of all, as a world, we continue to need fossil fuels, and will, for a few more years. While we do, it's important that we innovate, that we transform our energy mix to reduce the amount of carbon emitted both in the production and the transport of those fossil fuels that are still necessary. These are issues that we have grappled with, that Canadians grappled with in the last 2 elections, and continue to understand that we need to move forward on fighting climate change and managing the transition as effectively and ambitiously as we possibly can. That's what Canadians have trusted this government to do, and that's what we will continue to do. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, so we also heard from Justin Trudeau about ideas on carbon pricing and methane reduction for Canada, and he's talking about how Canada is very willing to step up and do what they can to reduce carbon emissions. So carbon pricing is, there's nothing wrong with the idea of it. The issue would be around carbon pricing. How do they make sure that they redistribute the money so that it goes to programs that would eliminate the burning of fossil fuels and emitting carbon into the atmosphere? It is something that Justin Trudeau and as Prime Minister of Canada and the governing bodies of Canada have yet to work out. There's a flaw in the program that most of that money goes back to the oil companies, which their main goal, their main way of making money and profit is to actually drill and mine carbon out of the ground so that it can be burnt as fuel. So the Canadian government actually pays subsidies to the oil and gas companies. And in another program, we heard from the Premier of Alberta, where he's saying that the federal government can't abandon Alberta because we produce the oil, we make the money for the country, and we deserve to have be a priority to the Canadian people, because without them the Canadian government would collapse financially. So carbon pricing is good as long as the money is going towards programs that would reduce the amount of carbon being emitted into the atmosphere. And Justin Trudeau's program doesn't necessarily reflect those ideas. So COP26 is bringing up a lot of issues. They're trying to keep and adhere to the Paris agreements, but are the countries that are involved really trying to do their best to make real changes in how we do things so that we can reduce the amount of carbon emitted into the air, thus keeping down greenhouse gases, therefore affecting climate crisis and keeping the overall planet temperature down. So there we have it. Thank you for listening to Depictions Media. You've been listening to Policy and Rights, and I've been your host, Michael Clogs. Thank you for listening today, and thank you for supporting us with our sponsors. Please go to depictions.media for more information and click on our contact link and let us know how we can help bring your story and help bring us to a better world. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.